to start. So we've got a few network problems. Give us a second. Okay, you ready? All right. Welcome again to Faith in the City. We are so glad that you are here with us today, whether you're here in person or those of you that may be joining virtually. This is our last session for this particular year, and then we'll have a summer break. And we'll resume next year. Now, 5 years ago, when we started focusing on educational equity, we had no idea that we would still be focusing on it 5 years in, and that in one way or another, we'll still be focusing on it next year. There's still much important work to be done and things to be considered, although we may be broadening as we go, because of course, education intersects so many other issues as well. So as other issues tend to be connected, we'll bring those in again. So we look forward to seeing you back in the fall. There may, in fact, be a special. We'll start in October, but we may have something special in September. We'll see. We're working on that still. So watch for teaser information going forward. Today, we're going to focus in on that wonderful intersection and complementary relationship between schools and parents. We all could agree that those connections are vitally important. Research shows us that where parents are involved in their children's education and where there's a good relationship between school and home, that children do better, that they benefit from that, and that the outcomes are positive. So we all know that. But defining what that looks like sometimes is tricky and challenging, because the roles are different, though complementary. Probably every person in this room could cite examples of maybe the best and the worst in some of those relationships, and how you saw your own parents interacting with school as you went through. I certainly could tell a few stories. As both a child myself, a parent myself, a former teacher and counselor, have encountered this intersection frequently. Right now, it's a public hot button issue. And what parents may want and what schools want may not be exactly what's reflected in the legislative efforts that are going on to focus in on what they are calling as parent rights. Yes, parents do have important rights and do need to be well informed about what's happening in school and whether their children are safe and whether their children's needs are being met. Just as teachers and school staff desperately need to have good information about what's happening at home that may be affecting the child when they show up at school every day. So we know that, and we know that good communication flow is really important, and good strategies to promote partnership. That may not be what's actually being emphasized in some of the political efforts. In fact, if we're not careful, some of those political efforts may in fact undermine what we want to build in terms of trust and good outcomes for kids and for schools. So we need to be, as advocates, as informed citizens, very attuned to what's really going on and what's beneath the language that may appear. You've got a handout, because I could never reduce it enough to get up here and say it all. You can read that at your leisure, and it's my attempt to go online and find out as much as I could about the variety of things that are at work in both the national and state levels. The Parents' Bill of Rights Act passed the House of Representatives in March and is still pending in the Senate. And there's some good things, of course, but again, look behind the language and see what may or may not concern you. It talks about schools giving parents access to curriculum, access to review budget and expenditures at schools, to review what's in the school library. Some of that has already led to attempts to ban certain books and so forth. So just know that that's going on. There's also often embedded in the legislature attempts to curtail or speak to transgender rights, other gender issues, other teaching of racial matters, and so forth. Also, we should know that at the state level last year, 85 bills related to parental rights were introduced in 26 states. 6 of those were signed into law, 2 in Florida, 2 in Arizona, and 1 each in Georgia and Louisiana. This year, 62 parental rights bills have been introduced in 24 states and are in various stages of completion. And some of the stuff in the state level legislative bills, I think, is particularly concerning because it says, for example, parents may opt their child out of classroom instruction if they disagree with what's being taught. It speaks and prohibits to the teaching of race, ethnicity, color of national origin that might lead to any kind of collective guilt. It also allows for an increase in public funds that can be used for private schools. Some of this is controversial at least and maybe harmful at worst. I think in contrast, if we look at what schools and other organizations write and what have in their policies and procedures, we see them wanting to find more effective ways to communicate, to have a good partnership, to build a welcoming environment for families. And we also know that all parents and teachers want to be sure that education is continuously improving in terms of quality and that we're able to recruit and retain and pay adequately the highest quality workforce possible. So again, stay tuned, keep your ear to the ground, reach out, let legislatures know of your concerns or those things that you support and what they're doing. And at the end of our time today, we'll try to get an update about some of the most recent and current things going on in our own legislature. Today, we are very fortunate to have a panel that I think can speak from experience, daily lived experience to the issues we're talking about. We have a parent, Sharlee Hainesworth. Sharlee has raised 4 children, is still in the throes of raising, I should add. 3 of her children have been students in the Winston-Salem school system. Winston-Salem Forsyth. Her oldest daughter is a 20-year-old that graduated from R.J. Reynolds. Another daughter is a current senior there, and her son is a 5th grader at Whitaker Elementary. She is a community-based researcher and trainer and active in both Forsyth Family Power and also Action for Equity. Nicole Wooten is a kindergarten teacher at Sedge Garden. She's been a teacher for 27 years, is just winding her per year as the district's teacher of the year, and will hang. Nicole gets to hand that torch off Thursday, but is very closed-mouthed about to whom it will go. So again, we'll have to watch the newspaper and see who takes her spot after Thursday. She received her Bachelor of Arts degree in Sociology and Social Work in Elementary Education from North Carolina A&T, and she has taught in both Guilford County and Forsyth County, with the bulk of it being here in our own county. She too is a parent of a youngster that I think you said is finishing up 8th grade and will go to Atkins next year. And then Tricia McManus is familiar to many of us as our superintendent, who took over after being interim just after Dr. Harrison's resignation. When she took over that role, the school board said, we realized we had already right here somebody that was already in the throes of the work and could carry it forward. Trish talked about how excited she was, and at that time outlined several goals, including turning around underperforming schools, increasing literacy outcomes, improving kindergarten readiness, focusing on recruitment and retention of high-performing staff, and addressing issues related to equity. That sounds like a pretty full plate to me. So Trish has quite a background. She came to us from Florida, where she had held roles that ranged from being a teacher to assistant principal to being assistant superintendent for leadership and professional development. In those various roles, she was able to turn around several underperforming schools, and I know that's what attracted the attention of folks here in Forsyth County. She has quite a track record in that. Her bachelor's degree in elementary education is from the University of South Florida, and likewise her Master of Arts in Education Leadership is from that same institution. Each of these panel members are going to share from their own perspective. Because we're having some network difficulties, we had planned to have the questions that we sent to them up on the screen. That's not going to happen. But if there's a little slip in remembering, I'll remind them of that. Again, I'm Dean Clifford, and I'm a member of the planning team along with Spence O'Neill, Diane Lipsett, Sylvia Oberly, wherever she is, and we welcome you to Norwood and to Faith in the City. So Sharlee, get us started, please. Come on up.
Thank you, everyone. I'm really glad to be here today. I'm extremely nervous because public speaking is not my thing, but I figure if I just come here and speak to my own personal experience as a mother and as a beneficiary of public education, that would be a great starting point for this conversation. So a little bit about myself. I am originally from Western Pennsylvania, outside of Pittsburgh. I am one of 10 children. I grew up in very humbling beginnings. And I would say that my experience of my public education was rather limited. My school was underfunded. We didn't even have transportation to and from school after you got out of elementary school. So if your parents didn't have a car, you had to walk to school. That was my actual experience. Like, I was actually limited to getting the basic education. And also I was limited in what I was learning as a student in school. And when I got into adulthood, I realized, and I look back, that I didn't know much about myself and I didn't learn much about my history. And in fact, I remember there being 5 pages or even a chapter dedicated to specific history about my people and where I come from. And I got to adulthood thinking that racism wasn't a thing, that Martin Luther King eradicated racism, and that was my understanding. And in actuality, in real time, I was experiencing it every single day, and I did not even know how to identify it. So I am a mother now. And I have an obligation to my kids to protect them and to make sure that they are well informed, because I know what the barriers are to having a full life if you don't have the whole picture. And so I pushed books on my kids. I love to read books, but I wanted my kids to read whatever they wanted to read. And as a result, my 2 daughters were like, they still always have their nose in a book to this day. And my oldest daughter, who graduated from Reynolds in 5th grade, she won a literacy award for reading 250 books in 5th grade. Yes. And not once did I ever say, well, let me see that book that you're reading and let me examine the contents of what you're absorbing. And some might say, well, that's reckless, but to me, it was allowing my daughter's cup to be filled with all information. It allowed her to become a critical thinker. It allowed her to discern her own opinions about what is right and what is wrong. And you can only make those determinations when you have all of the information in front of you. And so as a mother, I'm committed to my kids not being limited to what they're able to learn. And I'm also committed to the relationship that I have with my children's educators, with the staff in the school. We don't always see eye to eye, and there are a lot of barriers to what that looks like. But overall, there is a commitment on both ends for what is best for my children. And sometimes I have to advocate, like, for my children and their perspectives, their lived experience, their culture at home, and why certain things may be misunderstood about them or perceived about them. And it's my job as a parent to have an open communication with the school, with the teachers, so that my child is not misunderstood, so that my child's teacher is able to understand them and help foster a really strong relationship that centers what's best for my child at all times. So again, I've had barriers with that. It's hard to get people who never lived or walked a mile in your shoe to understand your perspectives. But I think as long as we keep the communication open, That is the only way that we can get there. And we have to trust that our teachers, they went to school to do this, that they were selected, and there was a selective process that got them there. And we have to trust that they also are going to educate our kids the best way they know how. And together as a unit, there's an endless possibility of what kids are able to learn. And some of it may be restricted in school, but as a parent, it's my job to supplement what my child's not learning in school and to make connections to what my child should be learning in school. But I never want to limit anyone else's perspectives, point of view, stories, because I want my children to be able to go out into the world, excuse me, and know how to interact with everyone, to take into consideration everyone's lived experiences, everyone's culture, their background, their identities, and treat them like human beings. And that's the only way we could be a productive society. So that's it.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Wooten. I am from a little town called Scotland Neck, North Carolina. Anybody know what that is? Oh, yay. Not far from Rocky Mount, Roanoke Rapids. I'm so honored to be here. I feel blessed to be in this position. Being named Teacher of the Year for the district was such an honor, and I'm very grateful. Thank God to pass that on to the next person. I am presently a kindergarten teacher at Sedge Garden. I have this is my 28th year in teaching, and it has been a wonderful ride. I have taught all grades in elementary, except first grade. I guess I'll just retire on and not teach first grade. But the one thing that I can say that has constantly stayed within my 28 years is my love and passion for what I do and my connection to my families. My families and I always tell them, because my nickname is Miss Woo Woo, so the kids and parents call me Miss Woo Woo, and I always tell them, once a woo woo baby, always a woo woo baby. So one of the things that I feel is very important is that first interaction that I have with a parent. And I think it's important to know that those are their babies. And as a teacher, I always look at it as how I want someone to treat my baby. I have a son who's in 8th grade, and I always wanted him to have a teacher that loved him like her own or his own. So it's very important that that first interaction with parents, that they see you as mom or dad away from home. And so my students, they'll say, Miss Wooten, but I feel like once students see the connection between the families and the teacher, there's nothing that you can't do with that student. They buy into your relationship as a teacher with the parents. So one of the things that made it possible for me to have a great relationship with my families has been the support from the administration, because I feel like we're all a group of people working together to do what's best for our children. And it's important for us to be in a comfortable environment where parents, teachers, where we all feel supported and loved. Being in an environment where parents feel like what they say or what their opinion matters, because I think that's important as we bridge this gap and we bring families and teachers together. Few examples, I had a student, and a few years ago, I looped, which means I taught him in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. So I had a class that I taught 3 years in a row, all 3 grades, and that was tough because I had to learn 3 different curriculums. He came in with a learning disability. He was diagnosed with a learning disability. He left without a learning disability. And I am very grateful for my relationship that I built with his mom and the dad, because they were sitting across the table. I can remember them sitting across the table and in tears. And they're like, what are we gonna do? How are we gonna help this baby? And I remember hours and hours that I spent, making sure that I did what I felt was right by this baby. When he reached 4th grade, I could see his growth. And by 5th grade, he'd taken off. So now he stands a whole lot taller than I am in college on the dean's list. So that's just one of many, many stories that I've had with just that conversation, just, being available as a teacher. My parents do have my cell number. I know we're not supposed to do that, but they know that, sorry. But I want them to know that I'm available, and I don't care like what time of night it is. That has happened. Sometimes our children go through things that we know not of. And I think that it's important as a teacher that I'm available. I had a young man come to me. He came to visit me at my school, and they came to get me at lunch, and they said, Miss Wooten, someone's here to see you. I said, what? So he is, he's 18 years old, and he looked like he was going through something. And as a teacher, and I know she mentioned my social work degree, I feel like sometimes I use that just as much. Teachers are so much more than just teachers. We don't just teach reading, writing, and math, science and social studies. We are mothers. We are counselors, mentors. We do so many things, but I could just look at him and tell he was going through something. Now I'm getting old, so I could not remember him. I said, that name does not sound familiar. 28 years, it's a lot of students. And so he began to tell me who he was, and I found out he was not even in my class. He was in the class across from me, and he came back to say thank you for encouraging him. And he said that he did not get to, his parents were upset with him because he did not go to college, and he had found another avenue. And I began to talk to him about finding a passion, and it not just have to be dealing with having a 4-year degree, but you have to find what you love to do. And when you wake up every morning and you get to go to a place like me at Sedge Garden with a smile on your face because you're doing something you love to do, I said that is very important. And his words to me were, I knew you were going to say that. He said, I told my parents I would come talk to you. You always knew what to say to me. And he wasn't even in my class. That's what it's all about. We can't just be there for them while they're in our class. We have to be there for them at all times. We have to show our parents that we support them, that we love them, that we're a family, and that if there's anything that we can do to help them, that we are here. So today, I'm very grateful again to be here. I'm grateful for this audience that care enough, because our babies need us so much. We don't know what they're going through. A lot of times, sometimes we have to just look in their eyes and see that they're not the same today that they were yesterday. And I think it's important that you're here, that you care enough to bridge that gap and help our families and our teachers, well, our educators, as far as administration, all of us come together in love for our babies. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Are we not? I mean, teachers like that make us the greatest district. Parents like that make us the greatest district. Thank you, guys. And so many of you all in the room too. So basically, I have a few questions that I'm going to be responding to, all like both of my colleagues have done. But basically, one of them is about when I arrived in the district, what did I see about parent and school relationships, and how our schools interacted and worked with our families compared to what I had seen in my history. This is my 33rd year. I'll be finishing 33 years in public education, pre-K to 12 public education the entire time of my career. And it has been the best. It was the best choice to be an educator. It started out as a job. It became a calling. Shortly after that, I didn't realize in college it would be such a calling when I decided to be a teacher, even though both of my parents had that background as well. So I approach the daily work of being an educator from both my educator hat, but my mom hat, my parent hat, which I'm a mom of 2 girls. They both went through public education their entire school years. Every situation was different. Every classroom, every teacher was a little bit different. Every school that they matriculated to might have been a little bit different, but all in all, they both had an amazing experience. And one was on a kind of a traditional track in school, and Megan, as many of you have met her or have heard me talk about her, was in special needs. She has Down syndrome, so she was in special needs classes her whole life. From when I asked her for her to be repeat pre-K, she was about this big, and I said, could she, she had done 2 years of pre-K. I said, I know it's not the norm, but could she just do pre-K 1 more year? And honestly, and I was told, just like we would probably tell parents, well, that's not normal. That's not what we usually do. But guess what? They let us do it. It was good for Megan. They let us do it. And it didn't hurt her later on, graduating instead of at 18, at 19. And then she finished 2 more years. So I give you that very quick story because parents need to have a voice in decisions that impact their children. Parents do have a voice in decisions that impact their children. And so all of this parent rights, it's just shocking to me because parents have a right in their children's education already, and it's called a partnership. And so my answers are going to be in reaction to that. So what did I observe when I got here? I'll tell you, it was hard. I got here at the beginning of the pandemic. My first 2 years, people weren't on campuses. That's horrible. That was horrible. And so to even keep anyone from a campus, whether it be a parent, a volunteer, or a grandparent, my parents were also very involved in my children's education. I was a principal. I needed my parents involved, and they were taking my kids to school, picking them up, being at the table for things. So that's important. It's not just, it's a family affair, this business that we're in. And so I say that it was hard for me to even understand what the relationship was my first 2 years, because it just was a different time. So last year and this year, we've gotten back to what the partnership should look like. And so the partnership is what that means. It should be a partnership. Educators can only be successful with children when the parents are at the table together, helping make decisions that are best for our children. That does not mean, I have never in my life looked at lesson plans, other than being a principal, I did obviously, but as a mom, I have not looked at lesson plans, nor would I ever want to get on the computer and look before my child goes to school tomorrow. I don't have time for that. I trust my teachers to do what they should be doing. I trust my building leaders to be monitoring what's happening in classrooms to make sure the instruction is right for our children. That there are people in place to do that. Do I need to micromanage that as a parent? If you have time to do that, good for you. I never did and never will. I'm a mother. When my children come home, I need to be the mom. I'm not the teacher, even though I think parents are their children's first educator. But they learn from how we model. They learn from me how I treat my children's teachers, how I talk to my children's teachers, how I email my children's teachers. Like that is all how parents can impact what their children, how their children do things with it as far as interacting. That's an important part of how our parents interact with their children. So let me go back to then what we're doing here. There are 2 facets of strong parental partnership. One is how we approach it from the district perspective. One is how we approach it from a site-based perspective. School culture, every school is responsible for creating a positive school culture. How do we ensure, and that includes active parent outreach and engagement. And I am not talking about hosting parent nights, you guys. That's important, and those activities are great, but I'm talking about partnership, meaning we work together on behalf of our child, and that can look very different for different families. So the first and foremost is that we should be a judgment-free zone when it comes to how we approach our families. We as educators should not be judging any family. Every family dynamic is different. And so to be a strong educator, you educate all children and you embrace all families and parents, period. Embrace all and listen to all equally, even those that might not be able to show up at school because they're busy working 3 jobs. That doesn't mean they don't need to show up at school to be a strong parent. And this is the philosophy that I bring to the table and what I would expect people of my parenting, because if I were to be judged by the number of times I was at school during the day, I would be a pretty bad parent. I showed up for parent conferences and for all the events my kids were in, but I was actually a principal working and an assistant principal working every day. And so that's very important. So here's what we're doing at the district level. Number one, our principals have what we call priority practices. These are practices we expect across all schools. And one of those clear practices is that every school has a clear family engagement plan, how they engage families, how they partner with families. So that's a priority. Number 2, our goal 3 of our strategic plan is about strengthening family and community engagement. The family engagement part of that, we have a whole family outreach department that I've added since I've been there. You may know Rhonda Mays. She leads that department. We have a CARES team that is under that department. We have mentoring programs that are under that department. So family engagement is a priority. So we've got a goal that actually outlines that. Just yesterday, we were updating ourselves on what is the progress we're making on goal 3. We're tracking, when we do these district-wide call outs, we're tracking how many families actually get those messages. Now, if you hang up on the message, that's on you. But how many families are actually getting the messages? And then we're looking at, well, how many phone numbers do we have that are not good phone numbers? So we're going back and trying to address that with every school so that when we do district-wide communications, all of our families are getting that. Most people have a cell phone. Most do in this day and age. Even families that may be facing poverty or other, many have a cell phone. And so what we're doing is cleaning up those numbers to make sure. Now, not everybody wants to be emailed, but we do emails and cell phones. And then each school has their own outreach efforts. And so I will always go back to good old fashioned pick up the phone and call, good old fashioned home visits, anything to connect with our families. There should never be an excuse that we cannot connect with a family. I was always a principal in high need areas, and I always was able to connect with all of my families. And so that when we say, oh, we can't get a hold of parents, no, we can. You just got to do some extra work sometimes. And so one of those is us making sure we can find phone numbers. And honestly, families always show up when good things are happening for their kids. So you want families to come in, have good things happen for their kids, and they will show up. They might not just show up on a conference night. Those are pretty boring. And if I have to stand outside for, 3 hours waiting for my conference, that's not going to be good. So there are different ways that we connect with families, but every family can be reached. And so basically district-wide, we've got our goals and we've got our strategies that I've named some. We also expect our schools to do regular outreach to families. They are closest to our families. They're at the car line, they're at the dismissal, they can be out in the communities. And so that individual outreach is important. I think something else, as times have changed and we've gone into a lot of text and emails and remind apps and Power School. It's very important to me that when a child is anything's happening with a child other than them excelling and doing well, that we still use, again, the good old fashioned call the parent, bring the parent in. Parents should not be looking at Power School to find out, oh my gosh, that should not be happening. So I think sometimes in the world of social media, in this world of digital age and all of this, people use that as, well, I sent the remind, or well, I sent the email, or well, I sent this. But honestly, when a child is struggling, it should be mom, dad, grandparent, whoever, let's come in and talk about this. How can we work together to help our child? And so basically, I think that's important as we move to these quicker, more efficient ways of doing things, we sometimes lose that personal touch. And so my vision for parent engagement is that we never lose the personal touch in Winston-Salem, Forsyth County. And it sounds like with Ms. Wooten, we have not lost the personal touch in your parent. That is my vision for family engagement. And last, like parent advisory, starting a parent advisory is a newer initiative that I have just rolled out. We had about 600 applicants for this. What does that tell you? People want to be involved at the systems level. Again, this does not take the place of your involvement at a school level. We look at this in two different ways: school involvement, and now this is central district involvement. My hopes and dreams for this group are that we have diverse voices at a table that can actually listen to, here are some things we're thinking about in the district. Can you all weigh in on that early on before even we start to implement certain things? So weighing in on things, but also to help us educate. There are things that get miscommunicated and as things go through that grapevine called social media. So we've got to, like, this also can give me about 50 people that really can go out into different areas. We're going to make sure that again, when I say diverse representation, I mean by where you live, by race, by gender, by what your children, the needs your children have. We want to make sure we have the voice of students with exceptionalities at parents at the table, or students that might be in an AG program, or students that, have different experiences. And so it's going to be, I'm looking forward to having this group of parents help advise, but that's not where it's going to stop, because that voice of 50 is not the voice of all. So I think we need to continue with other things that we do with surveys and focus groups and town halls and things like that are also going to be more and more. Elevating the voice of our students and parents is a priority of mine, in addition to everything else that you read. And last but not least, I will just say that as far as parents' rights, and I don't know if thank you for that summary, which is really helpful. Again, I'm going to go back to some of the things in that are restrictive, are punitive, and will only, I'm just going to say, run quality teachers out of our profession. I'm just going to be clear about that, because what that says is you don't trust us to actually create a positive partnership. And so the fact that we need to even have a bill about parents' rights and parent engagement is crazy to me, when I think that you can't have quality education, quality teaching and learning without parents at the table. And I don't know of any public ed system that has tried to push parents to the side. I can tell you right now, ours is not one of them, if there are those. We want parents at the table. We want parents to partner. We don't need a bill to tell us that parents are the #1 person we need at the table to help educate children. We're here together. So I'm hoping that I think that the future of public education, could we start focusing on what is working and do more of that, like getting mental health care in our schools and nurses and things that are important, and stop writing bills that are actually not even necessary. So thank you.
I'll tell you what my biggest regret is, and that is that the legislature wasn't sitting here listening. I want to go back just a minute, and then we'll open it for other questions to pick up on a couple of comments. So first of all, Sharlee, you talked about sometimes you talked about some of your positive experiences, and you also mentioned that sometimes there are barriers or obstacles. Could you give an example, and you might just pull that microphone over, to some of those barriers or obstacles, and how you or the teacher managed to work through those?
Yes. Well, for people who know me, I speak a lot about my son and his experience. My two older girls, they were unproblematic. But my son, he is more like me. He's very curious and rambunctious. He's very in tune with his emotions. Sometimes he lacks emotional maturity. But he is, like, his environment was one that was very nurturing, that allows for self-expression, that I don't limit my children's opinions. I don't limit, their ability to question my judgment as a parent, because I'm not always right. And my children are humans to me, and I learn so much from them too. This is a equally beneficial arrangement. And so I think that my biggest barrier is having to defend my son's lack of maturity, because it can come off as like behavioral issues. But really, he's just a big baby. He is like a crybaby. He wants like a hug and the love and nurture that he gets at home that you don't really get when you're in a school structured environment like that. And he wants it, and so it shows up, and I have to just kind of just explain his point of view, where he's coming from. Now sometimes he just lost his mind, but I'm able to, with frequent communication with his teacher, I'm able to, say, oh no, he was dead wrong, or oh no, this might be why this happened. And together I help, I learn from what my son is doing at school from his teacher, and she learns about what is happening at home in his everyday life. And together we work together to figure them out.
I think we heard from both you and from the teacher the importance of the openness in the communication and the importance of recognizing the shared love for the child. And what I hear from you is that it's not just, sometimes it's cultural misunderstanding, and sometimes it's individual, unique misunderstanding of a child's personality and needing to have that cross communication. Ms. Wooten, I wanted to ask you what you're hearing from your fellow teaching colleagues about the current atmosphere, because I'm very concerned about what Ms. McManus referred to at the end about some of what's going on may drive away teachers, quality teachers. So what are you hearing from your colleagues? Are they nervous?
They are nervous. There is a struggle with classroom management. And I think, if we can somehow speak with the universities. I've heard a lot of new teachers say that they're struggling. They don't know how to manage a classroom. And we all know we can't teach if we can't manage a classroom. Right. The workload is a lot for the new teachers, just knowing how to manage their time. And we talk about, it's a process. We're still learning. I'm still learning. 28 years, I'm still learning. So I think it's important that we work on making sure our mentors are in the building with the teachers and on the grade level, same grade level with the teachers. I think that's very important. And just being available to sit down with the teachers and talk with them, and possibly, go in and observe and kind of catch those things when they're happening. But yes, there are some concerns about, the management piece.
Have you seen any current increase among the parents in your school? Do they seem to be coming in more supportively or less supportively because of what's going on in our atmosphere?
Well, I think the parents are recovering from COVID.
Parental recovery from COVID.
I really want to. But I think that we're still cleaning up from COVID. I think that a lot of parents we went through a lot of mental health issues, and parents are still in a position where they don't really know what to do. Mm-hmm. I think we're still trying to get back on track. I think we're getting there, but I would say they're trying to be more supportive, but they're still, they have a lot of things going on right now. And I think, parents working, and I always say, my parents don't have to physically be in the building. I just need you to be there when I call. So I think that we kind of confuse support as in you being right there. Like Dr. McManus said, I work, I'm a teacher, so I don't have time to go to my son's school and babysit him. He needs to go in there and do what he's supposed to do. But if the teacher calls me, then I'm available. So I think sometimes the support meaning you don't have to physically be in the building, just have to be available when we need you.
All right, let's see if there's some questions. And then at the end of that, we're going to get an update from Angela Levine, and I'll say more about that in a minute. Questions from any of you? Yes, Valerie. Okay, I'm not sure our virtual audience could hear that. So speak to children's rights, not just parents' rights. Anybody want to tackle that?
Say, can I, okay, I guess that's.
Whoa.
Okay, I guess it's good. I'll just try to talk loud. So when you look at some of this, it does, when you listen to our parent at the end about what she wants for her children, some of the language of the parents' rights actually does not support the student's right at all. I mean, that's not really showing up here. So I think, the decisions we make in our district, it's very important. It's one of our core values that we are student-centered, student-first. And so the decisions have got to be about what's best for students. Some of the things in here actually could unintentionally put a child in harm's way. And so that's really a problem for us when we look at some of this language. So, I mean, we're only here for our students, but again, in a true partnership, and I'll go back to what you said about like books, parents that are strong parents, like I knew what my kid checked out on I knew my child checked out of the library. I didn't need the school I didn't need to be part of a team to look at every book and figure out what's in the library. I didn't need to have books banned from the library. If I had a problem with a book, then Morgan wouldn't check it out. Megan wouldn't check it out. Like we would be as a family making those decisions. I didn't need somebody else to create a rule about it. And I think that's, again, I already answered about the children's rights. So a child should be able to go in and pick out a book. And if their parent should be active in their life. So I'm just wondering why we need that outlined. In other words, why do you need it outlined? If you want to be an active parent, then be active. And why do I need to create a rule about it to help you, you know what I mean? To keep stuff out of your child's hand, to help keep your child. I don't know. There's a lot of contradiction to me within this. And so, yeah, we only operate in our school district. It's what is best for children. And we want parents at the table helping us partner in that.
Personally, I think that children need access to the most accurate and complete information in every field of endeavor. Most of us my age can attest to the fact that there was a lot left out of our history when we were in school. And I want to commend you, for example, for feeling comfortable with the fact that your child needs to have access to more complete information to form their own judgments and their own critical thinking as they're going along. So I'm hearing that clearly from each of you.
Can I call out one other thing about this? The whole idea about not making a group of people feel guilty or eliminating it, saying the conversation about racism. You cannot teach history of our country without racism being discussed. You cannot. It is the history. Yeah. And so like the intentionality behind making a group feel guilty about that, that's not the intention. The intention is to bring awareness so that we can make change, much needed change in our country now and moving forward. So I think that, again, a lot of what's in here is going to do a disservice to our children if these things pass.
To actually reduce children's rights and learning, right?
Absolutely.
There was another question. Yes, Janet.
No longer have kids in schools. What can we do that's good support for that?
Okay, again, for the virtual audience, the question is that we no longer have children and we're not a stakeholder in that sense because our children have moved on. What can we do to be supportive to the school system?
To me, I think being involved, which many of you in this room are regularly. I mean, we've got, oh gosh, thousands and thousands of people that come and volunteer in our schools, whether that be through reading tutoring, whether it be through mentoring, whether it be through just being a book buddy. We have, Saturday, I was at the community day at Ronaldo House, and we had 4 of our schools were there all day, and there were volunteers everywhere. There's a lot of opportunity for volunteerism. So even if your children are grown out of the system, there are lots of children that need additional supports. And so I think being involved in volunteerism is important. I also just think it's all, I love coming to things like this because people walk up to me and say, thank you, we know what's happening, and thanking our educators, because there also can just be this loud negative voice that can create just this picture of negativity. And our kids do not, neither do the adults, thrive in negativity. And so like just helping get the word out, helping people understand what's happening in our educational system. And there's so much more positive than there is negative. But we do have other things around mental health concerns that are real, violence in our community that is real. And so I just think that everybody's got to be all hands on deck as part of the solution. And the only way to do that is to really get involved.
And I can personally speak to one of the things you mentioned, the Family Engagement Committee that's been set up, that department. I'm on that committee, and that committee is working hard to come up with a parent academy series of workshops to let parents know more and more about what's going on in the schools. Other questions? All right, Amy, why don't you step on up, and while you're coming, well, you want to ask your question first. Okay.
Given some of the legislation that is in process at the state level, and then when you talk about in a few minutes, how is our district going to abide by the law, but also uphold policy that's already adopted for how it, interacts with students, what it teaches, all those kinds of things? Because it seems like it's going to be a bit of a difficult needle to thread. Have you all started talking about that?
So the question again, given the fact that we have legislation emerging that sometimes will counter either policies that are already in place or best practice, how will you prepare to respond to that?
Yeah, so I think that, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that's smart, that we're smart. And so I'm keeping fingers crossed, but in the face of, honestly, there's a lot that we do as a school district and in our state that is legislated that we may or may not agree with, but it is legislated, it's law. And I always ask the question, well, what if we don't do it? And so I always get the answer, well, funding could be withheld. I'm like, well, I'll just be honest with you, funding is already withheld. I'll just be very honest with you. We do as much as we can with a bare bones state and federal dollars. Thanks to ESSER, we were able to do more. So to your question, Angela, so we will need to, number one, make sure that we are interpreting everything right. And number two, it's in the implementation, and make that as least disruptive to our classrooms and our educators as possible, because there's stuff on there about posting stuff and all that. The hours it would take to do some of that would take every bit of planning where we need to provide quality instruction for our children. It would take all that time for me to post this and post that and make sure all this was up. And honestly, we already do things like, we already have policy around responding to parents in a timely fashion. We already have those things. We don't need to add to that. So I'm not sure yet, like there will probably become interpretations that come with it. And then what does this mean in reality? We'll have to take time to then look at our own policies. What changes do we have to make? And I'm hoping all that takes a lot of time true. We will need to abide by the law, but I do believe I will ask many, many questions as a superintendent to figure out what we can and cannot do that will be the least hurtful to our families, our children, our educators. And so there will be a lot of questions that will have to be answered. Because again, there's a lot of devil in the details with all of this stuff, and we don't even know all of it. I don't even know all of it.
So again, for the virtual audience, the response is that number one, to look very carefully at what does pass. In the meantime, hope that some of it doesn't, and to interpret it very carefully. Know that you do have to abide by the law, but you try your best to make sure that it's implemented in a way that does not hurt the classroom or the students or the teachers. There are in some of the state bills punitive measures included about losing your teaching license, losing funding, losing your position So hopefully that does not appear in any of our legislation, and we need to resist that in every way we can. Angela is going to come and tell us a little bit about what's happening before we stop. She will be speaking on behalf of two organizations, really, both the Community for Public Education, Public Schools, and also Red, Wine, and Blue. I love that name. To tell us a little bit about some of the advocacy work they're doing and what they're countering at the state level, and then we'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean. Thank you all for letting me come here to speak to you. As Dean mentioned, I am a member of Community for Public Schools, which is a very localized grassroots group. We're not a 501c3. We are really just a group of concerned citizens that are doing advocacy work here locally. And then my employer is Red, Wine, and Blue. We are a nonpartisan organization that tries to provide a non-threatening on-ramp for women who want to get more politically engaged or understand and learn how to do advocacy in their communities. So I wear both hats. So first of all, I'm just say there are so many bills right now. It would take longer than I have here to go over all of the ones that actually could have an impact on public schools, teachers, students. I'm going to highlight a few of them. Community for Public Schools has a newsletter that we will send the link out to. So if you all want to join this newsletter, we're going to do a recap this month, because we are in the midst of what's known as crossover week, where bills that were filed in the state house and bills that were filed in the state senate potentially cross over. And to Superintendent McManus's point, we are hoping some of them don't make it, and those bills just kind of die in committee and don't move forward. But right now, there's a lot of uncertainty. So I'm gonna highlight a few of the ones that we are watching and that we think you all should also be kind of paying attention to. So the first one is a Senate Bill 193, which is a bill that local group Action for Equity is very much opposed to. It's a bill that requires 7th grade students to complete a career development plan in 7th grade. They have to do it before they can go to 8th grade. Action for Equity believes that it's bad policy to establish a government mandate that is age inappropriate and could become an obstacle that stretches the achievement gap farther. So that's one of the bills that we are following. House Bill 187 is a bill that I think has been mentioned a little bit here. It is one that is somewhat of an education gag order, because it is designed to limit what teachers can teach about race, racism, the history of race in this country. I think it's pretty obvious what the negative outcome is there. It certainly would limit what students' knowledge is. Like many of the folks here, I didn't have a great background on the full history of our country growing up. And I certainly would want kids today to actually have that. So that is one of the bills. Another bill is House Bill 219, which is a charter school omnibus bill. And it would require public schools to share program-specific funding with charter schools, while charter schools would not be required to share their funds with public schools. So it is one of the bills that would start stripping some money out of public education. Another bill that is being watched is the Parents' Bill of Rights, which has been mentioned quite a bit. And I think one of the things I think it is important to highlight is that it really is a censorship of sorts, because it is going to limit the kinds of things that can be said. And I don't think it's said enough that this bill has language in it that would specifically marginalize LGBTQ+ youth. And bring harm to them. And it puts it's going to put teachers in a position of essentially having to out students to their parents. And as we've said here, teachers, are so important. They're like a surrogate parent at school, and many students, need to have that ability to be able to have someone they can confide in and know that they've got some support from. So there are some real concerns with that bill as well. There are a couple other bills that do impact students that are LGBTQ. There is a transgender sports ban that would prevent transgender students from participating in sports teams that are consistent with their gender. And this is one of those bills that is a solution searching for a problem. When you look at the total number of transgender students we actually even have playing sports, I've heard that it's 15 across the state. And so, but unfortunately, it is a type of bill that we've seen many other states also pass. And we are also seeing some local school boards in our state pass. As well, there is a bill that is not directly related to public education, but it does affect students because it is a bill that is banning transgender affirming care, which would indirectly impact the students in our schools that are transgender. The next one I wanted to highlight is one that Valerie and I have been working very hard to get people to sign a petition about, and we have a QR code at the back of the room on the table, and we would love to have as many sign it as possible. I think we're up to 645 signatures. She and I are headed to Raleigh this tomorrow to advocate for public education. We'd love to have 1,000 signatures to take with us. But this is, there's two versions, Senate Bill 406 and House Bill 823, and actually House Bill 420, which would allow the use of public taxpayer dollars for charter schools. And the main issue is it siphons money away, but it doesn't provide any of the accountability. Charter schools are not, they don't have the same kind of rules and adherence that public schools do. And they're not even required to serve all students. So charter schools could still, discriminate about who gets into the school and those kinds of things. Valerie has something she wants to add. Oh, I apologize. This is there's so many bills. Sometimes you get them. Okay, the charter school omnibus. This is the private school. That's right. This is the private school one. I apologize. And at a time when North Carolina is ranked last in the country in public school funding dollars, having more money be available to be siphoned out for people who want to go to private school without any of the accountability required just seems kind of crazy. So those are just a few of the bills. There are some others. If there are any questions, I'm happy to try to respond. Yes. My perspective on what's really going on is a dismantling of public education. And that's why it is important to fight against legislation that really is harmful to students, teachers, and school districts in the public sphere. Many of us were educated in public education. I know I was a huge believer in it. My kids were as well. And I don't want to see that. So, I mean, I think that's really at the crux of what's going on.
And somehow that is represented. So,
I think we can see from these comments just how busy the legislatures around this country have been, and also how important it is for us to read very carefully what is being discussed and talked about. I love your idea of a bill that says leave the teachers alone. Could you join me in thanking this wonderful panel? And I also want to thank Angela for trying to tackle the impossible task of addressing just how many bills are underway right now. So keep your ear to the ground and make your voice heard across. Because my understanding, for example, on the private school bill is that one of the things they would do is remove any income restriction for getting a voucher to go to private school. So that begins to dismantle the idea that it's really trying to help only lower income kids have choices. It's really to dismantle or weaken or sabotage our public schools. And remember the word in there, public schools. Sylvia, question? And don't forget to sign the petition. Thank you for being here today. We'll see you in the fall.